Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Scuttlebutt. Before we dive into the episode, we are very proud to welcome and celebrate our first sponsor. D&D Metal Recycling and Auto Salvage began as a small hauling and used auto parts operation in the Pittsburgh area in the late 1970s and has grown into a full-service metal recycling company with two locations, Lawrenceville and Tarentum. These are state-of-the-art scrapyards with deep roots in the community and a strong commitment to the service of their customers. D&D accepts all types of metal, both ferrous and non-ferrous, that may be generated by industrial manufacturing, construction and demolition, small commercial entities, as well as individual customers. They have a wide variety of material handling equipment and are capable of managing any job in a timely and efficient manner. You can contact them for quotes and availability at dndautosalvage.com. That's D&D autosalvage.com. Thank you, D&D, for supporting this podcast. And now, on with the show.
And I think Ryan and I actually got into a fist fight over the 203 grenade one time.
We were playing multiplayer on it was one of the Call of Duties, and Eric got very upset because I kept shooting him with the 203 at like blank range.
Welcome, everyone, to a bonus episode of the Scuttlebutt. Now, I say bonus episode because when we buck the trend of our normal programming and bring you a shorter episode, we like to call it a bonus episode. On this episode, we are going to talk with two veterans about an upcoming game that's received a lot of controversy. It's called 6 Days in Fallujah. Now, 6 Days in Fallujah, the game, is based on the second Battle of Fallujah, which took place in November and December of 2004 during the height of the Iraq War. The second battle was the bloodiest battle of the entire Iraq War for the American troops and is notable for being the first major engagement of the Iraq War fought solely against insurgents rather than forces of the former Ba'athist Iraqi government, which was deposed in 2003. Now, 6 Days in Fallujah, the game, was originally announced by Atomic Games under the umbrella of big-time game publisher Konami in 2009, but after a lot of controversy, Konami pulled support. Atomic Games dropped the title. 7 years later, in 2016, former Atomic Games CEO Peter Tamte formed his own publishing studio, Victura, to support the game's 2021 reemergence with Seattle-based developer Highwire Games at the helm. Now, 6 Days is described as a first-person tactical military shooter that recreates true stories, that's key, of Marines, soldiers, and Iraqi civilians who fought al-Qaeda during the toughest urban battle since 1968. Now, more marketing taken from the official website attests that the creators interviewed over 100 Marines and soldiers, along with 26 Iraqis, 23 of whom are from Fallujah itself, to shape, quote-unquote, real-life scenarios played through the eyes of real people who narrate what happened during the battle. Now, no section of the game will allow you to play as insurgents. From the publisher, so quote, based on their stories, we've invested more than 3 years building technologies to explore specific parts of the combat experience more realistically than other games have so far. Those other games probably being Call of Duty or Battlefield. The website continues, we hope that participating in these real-life moments of truth, again, quote-unquote, moments of truth, will give each of us a new perspective into events that have already shaped so much of our century. What we want to talk about here on the Scuttlebutt is sort of the controversy that is surrounding this game, and there are two big issues that have come up since the developer announced this game. The first is that Peter Tamte said of 6 Days, they're not trying to make a political commentary. Now, the publisher reverse coursed and acknowledged the inherent politics in making a game based on a real life battle at a later time. But that sort of started a bit more of the controversy in saying that a game based on real life battle is not a political commentary. Now, we don't usually dive into too much politics here on the Scuttlebutt, but we do want to acknowledge the fact that a game based on a real life battle has some level of politics involved in it. The second piece of controversy was Tamte's stated goal was to teach players empathy. Now, Tamty said he wants players to empathize with the U.S. soldiers involved in the battle, through whose eyes players will experience the majority of the game. A response to this, Anita Sarkeesian, media critic and executive director of Feminist Frequency, says that by asking players to empathize with U.S. soldiers in the Iraq War, 6 Days in Fallujah runs the risk of adding to a greater ongoing culture of generalizing and dehumanizing Middle Eastern cultures in media, especially video games, and especially since 9/11. Numerous studies and articles have been published about how 9/11 caused a spike in racist, anti-Muslim, and anti-Middle Eastern sentiment in the U.S. that hasn't gone away even 2 decades later and continues to be a problem in media depictions. Muslim civil rights and advocacy group CAIR, C-A-I-R, or the Council on American Islamic Relations, is requesting that Microsoft, Sony, and Valve avoid hosting or distributing 6 Days in Fallujah. Today, I'm going to be joined by Army veteran Ryan All and veteran Eric Smith to talk about the game and the controversy surrounding it. Now, I'm a gamer. Both Ryan All and Eric Smith are gamers. So part of this is us understanding what the game is and talking about it as a game. But the other part of it is talking about this as a war game and why these controversies exist. And is there a better way for us to present battles to civilians other than entertainment? We're going to ask these questions and more as we get into the conversation. And thank you all for joining us. And joining me now are Ryan All, consummate co-host here of the Scuttlebutt, and Eric Smith, both veterans of the Army and the Iraq War. Eric, I'd like you to introduce yourself first. Thanks for joining us on the Scuttlebutt for the first time.
Yep, I'm Eric Smith. I served in the Army infantry with Captain All. He was an NCO at the time. That was in 04 and 05, and then 08 and 09, we were overseas together.
Nice. Is there a game that you're currently playing right now, or one that you sort of dabble in consistently?
I've been dabbling in a couple. Like I said, gratuitous violence is what was making my day at the time. Days Gone for PS4. And then I was messing around with that new Assassin's Creed Valhalla as well.
Nice. That's one I definitely want to play. The original part story from 1 through 3 and 4 are some of the best stories I think I've ever seen in a game. Ryan, we all know who you are, so just tell us a game that you're playing right now.
I'm playing a bunch of NHL and Madden, and I actually just started playing recently a classic, which I'd never played before, which would have been great. Witcher 3 is really good. Wild Hunt. So
you gotta let me know how Witcher 3 is, because that's on my backlog. My backlog is probably years old. I'm gonna be 84 by the time I get through my backlog. And currently right now, I kind of play through each system. Xbox, I just started one of the more recent Modern Warfare remakes, which is pretty incredible. It's like playing a movie. Over on the PS4, I'm playing some Final Fantasy VII Remake. On my Switch, I'm playing some Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. My phone, I'm doing some retro gaming. I got some X-Men from the Genesis era. That's
Nice.
my COVID life is kind of like baby and video games and filming a podcast. So as we said in the intro, we're going to talk a bit about 6 Days in Fallujah here, ask some questions of you guys, and just kind of get an understanding of what the game is, how they developed it, why there's controversy. I'm going to show a bit of the trailer here in a second. And then we're going to dive a bit into the games you guys played while deployed. And I think there are probably some surprising games there that are going to be kind of fun to pick apart. But I'm going to share my screen here to start. This is the part in the trailer where they're going to show mainly gameplay. And this is actually voiced over by a veteran who was in the Second Battle of Fallujah. So I'm going to go ahead and start this now.
One squad has already walked down this alley. So we're just walking down pretty confidently. And these guys just open up.
There's one in the alley! There! I got you. Alley looks clear. Go right. On it. Watch out! Suppressing fire!
So as you can hear and see, this to me, this looks almost like any average sort of Iraqi city. Would that be accurate?
It's pretty close.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like familiar stylings that you see like on the two-story bazaar, and then if you notice like all the houses, like every house in Iraq has a wall around it, and then also like on the roof there's always like a little wall around the top of the roof. That was very common as well.
Okay, and then the gun seems to be pretty real world specific as well. Do you know which type of gun that was?
Yeah, that's an M4 and M16 of some kind.
Okay.
Can't quite tell without knowing the exact length, but it looks like probably an M16.
Okay.
Use orders to your team based on what you're pointing at. Pin enemies in place with suppressive fire while you flank.
Pretty, pretty realistic. That's something that they were advertising. It was going to be a realistic game, put you into the Second Battle of Fallujah. Very good graphics from what I could tell, and playing any of the newer systems, this looks pretty clean and crisp and clear. But I want to start talking a bit about maybe what you guys can tell me from what you've heard about the Second Battle of Fallujah. What was it like on the ground there?
Bloody.
Yeah, it was, some of the toughest fighting of the war. It was in the city. It was urban combat, and what we've talked about on the Scuttlebutt before and on other BBC programs is like how difficult urban fighting is, because it is so close together, and there's so many places that a person could hide, or so many dangers from different areas. So Fallujah was a really, really tough fight, from everything that we've heard from people who've been there. One of our sister units, 2nd Brigade, had been over there attached to the Marines, and they had been like in Ramadi, which I think was like right after the Second Battle of Fallujah. But yeah, it was some tough stuff out there in Anbar province, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
They followed that Sergeant Jason Kyle. That's one of the stories that is told in the video game. And he says he entered the city with 12 men, and I believe he said he left with 4 and himself.
Right.
So that's just one squad.
Yeah,
so that kind of gives you a taste of what they were up against.
So do you think that Highwire, being the publisher of the game, do you think they can represent a truthful human experience of the events through a video game? Is that possible?
So that's kind of where I think everybody has an issue, is that everybody expects it to be a documentary. Now, it's their stories and it's based off of true events, but if we're breaking it down, it's geared for a piece of entertainment. To tell these men's stories, it's difficult to base the whole game off of
just a couple stories.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So it's like, I guess there's 2 different ways. There's 2 different truths here. We have our veterans who are telling who they interviewed, talked to about their story, and then they're creating a sort of an experience for that story. There's then the human story that is the controversy that we're talking about, is like, how do you tell a fully truthful story here if we only see one side of the story? If we're seeing the veteran side of the story, then we're getting part of the story, and we would want to see maybe the civilian side, and not, we can't really go into the insurgent side in this game, because that, I think that would create even more controversy, but definitely the civilian side, we would want to see what the civilian experience was on the ground there.
Yeah, and that's what I don't quite understand about this controversy, is like a video game is not really the appropriate medium to tell the civilian side of the story. And if you want to ask, like, if you want to say maybe it's in bad taste to make a video game about a war that is this recent, like, that's one argument that you can make, and that's okay, but like that's doesn't seem to be what they're saying here. And it one of the articles that we read, opened up with like calling this a war crime simulator. Like, I think that, things like that just like immediately discredit the journalist. And it doesn't seem to make any sense, right? Like, there are tons of video games and tons of movies and tons of TV shows that talk about these very same things, and without so much of the controversy as this. And I can understand that, like, if what the video game maker is saying is that they're going to tell the whole story, and somebody's saying, well, you're not telling this side of it. Okay, that's a legitimate argument, but it's not really the median. So the medium. So maybe maybe the video game designer should change its stated goal, right?
Yeah, and I mean, also wrapped up within this is the idea that this is a first-person shooter. A lot of the military-style games are from that perspective. If you're flipping midway through the game into a civilian perspective, are we jumping into also that first-person perspective? And if they're fleeing the city, if you're becoming a refugee, if you're hiding out, because there's a combat or battle going on in the rooftops above you, how are they going to portray that truthfully and give you that sort of feeling of what that was like for them on the ground? And should we, as gamers, we consume these as entertainment, like I said, Far Cry, Assassin's Creed, you're playing, games that you're going to entertain you. Should we as gamers be worried about a game's representation of foreign cultures? And in the case of 6 Days, like Iraqi civilians, should we be concerned about that? And should we look to games to help educate us about that?
Is it any different if they make it a fictional setting and change the name of the culture to a fictional culture?
It's a fair question. If you're playing Halo, do we need to know the other side? Do we need to know what the story is of the
Covenant?
The Covenant. Boy, right on that. You got that Jeopardy question. So do we need to know the other side of the Covenant in Halo to feel like we get a more like an emotional understanding of the characters?
Right. You could say the same thing about all of the Call of Duty franchises, right? Where you're a World War II paratrooper out of the 101st Airborne. Like, do we need games of the Third Reich? And I'm not trying to compare these complaints to I'm not trying to draw any sort of connection between like what they're saying and Nazis, right? But like that's a common thing. Like, stories are typically told through this, and this happened, right? Like, the second battle of Fallujah happened. And if this is a documentary video game about like what the Marines, and especially the Marines and the U.S. forces, went through, then that's enough, right? It's not necessarily saying anything. And some of the articles and criticisms that have been out there, I think, are pretty far-fetched in what they're worried about this doing, and what they're worried about this saying, right? I mean, it borders on sometimes disingenuous or just complete dishonesty about what they thought happened in Fallujah, right? I mean, there were enemies there, and there wouldn't have been such a battle had there not been enemies there, right? Did civilians?
And it was expected.
Yeah,
high resistance was expected.
Yeah, I mean, did civilians die in Fallujah? Yes, civilians die in war all the time. I think if you can take anything out, war sucks. Like, we should try to avoid war at all costs, right? And that is a sad thing for sure. But you can't. I don't think you can criticize the game for trying to tell this story through that point of view.
In a way, it's honoring our fallen. I mean, it's telling Sergeant Jason Kyle's story and several other veterans that actually were there. And in today's society, maybe that's a better format to kind of get the story across versus a book or something other to appeal to the younger generations. A video game is a platform, maybe not necessarily to push your political agenda, but to give an interesting story and have some entertainment value at the same time.
And the Army has their sort of esports gaming team. Obviously, they want to use gaming in some way to help recruitment. We've had recruitment for forever since we've had an army. This is just a new way for the army to use technology to start to speak to a younger generation that they may not be able to connect with. So creating a documentary from the perspective of the American military, and especially an American veteran who can tell that story, and then you're able to play through that. And something that we should mention is that also in the game is that you're going to hear the veterans tell the story, and you're going to hear them tell the story throughout the actual level, which is something that I think is really key here, that I did find sort of buried in the articles that were written in the controversy of the game, because I think that creates a really incredible educational experience for the player. You know, I'm not just playing this level because I know that Kyle was there. Kyle's going to lead me through his story and tell me what was going on when they were going down that alleyway. You know, to me, that seems really key to understanding what his experience was, and probably, I would think, incredibly difficult for him to have to relive, to go through that and say he's had to sit with the game designers and say, yeah, that's what that alleyway looked like. That's where we had contact. This was really kinetic here. This is where we lost, you know, one of my squad mates. You know, that we're forgetting, I think, in the controversy that we read, that there is a story here that is their story, and that's truthful to them, and what should be told.
Absolutely. And what was it? The article you sent out from military.com, it mentioned that the team did work with several of these veterans, as well as civilians that were present during the battle as well. They had their input as well. So we looked at a trailer that lasts 6 minutes, and we're judging an entire game on it. And in the current political state of the world, I think the one lesson we need to take away is we can't judge a book based on its cover.
Right.
With everything that's happening right now. Reading through your article, the IGN article, you showed that alley scene, where if you watch it again, you can clearly see the first person that he engages in a situation where he believes is mostly hostile people. The individual clearly has a gun, yet the article states that it is a shadowy figure. And as soon as the Marine pies off that corner, he immediately takes contact from a building, where in the article it says that he indiscriminately fires into a building with unknown targets. Well, any military person that receives contact from a building is going to shoot back at said building.
That's a great catch, Eric. Really great catch there, because I missed that in sort of looking at the trailer and reading through the article, and how that's being talked about in the article versus what you're seeing in the actual game. And you're right. And there were rules of engagement within Fallujah, but as we said, this is a very live, active combat zone. This was the bloodiest battle since Vietnam. There were going to be casualties, and like you said, they went in there knowing this. And something else I find interesting here is that there was an actual game level made. I'm not sure which game it was in, of the Osama bin Laden raid, that you could play through this. I don't remember.
Honor.
Okay, so I don't remember there being the same level of controversy in being able to play through the Osama bin Laden raid as opposed to being able to play through the Second Battle of Fallujah. Did we need to see the other side of the story in the Osama bin Laden raid? We kind of already knew what that story was. And if you read up on your history of the insurgency in Iraq, you could get an idea of what that side was about, what their goals were.
Yeah, and it's true. It's very, they were, and maybe the difference is that there were a lot of civilian deaths in Fallujah, and that's very true, and that's sad, right? That is not something that can just be glossed over for the purposes of a video game being profitable. And I think the takeaway is that, hopefully the takeaway that most people take is war is not fun, and war should be a last resort, and those sorts of things. But I really think that the criticism of this game is misaligned with what they're trying to achieve, as far as what they want this game to be. That's just in my opinion.
Well, I think one thing also that's interesting from a gamer perspective in the idea of, we've all played a Call of Duty, we've all played Battlefield, Medal of Honor. There's a lot of copycats out there. This is something that they're doing in the game that's very interesting is they're doing procedurally generated rooms. We've talked about the fatal funnel, I believe, on the Scuttlebutt before, the idea that when you enter into a building, everybody is going through that same door, the fatal funnel. The first person that enters that door is never wrong, but he doesn't know necessarily what the building is whenever he first walks in. Well, the game is going to generate what the building is every time you play it, a new one, a new building, a new layout of the city every time you play it. So you're never going to be walking through, I can memorize this level through Call of Duty and I know exactly where every guy is, so it makes it real easy that I can walk right through the level. Well, this is changing that every time you load up the game and play through it, you're playing a whole different world, so you have to react to what the world is giving you. That's, in a way, I think, as a gamer, you're seeing sort of a real world aspect. You shouldn't know what's coming right on the other side of that door.
Yeah, I think that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would make for a very interesting gameplay.
And that's, I mean, in my opinion, that was the one thing that I took away from a lot of the articles in the trailer is they glossed over the actual unique concepts that the game has and focus more on the political environment of it. But yes, that's not something that's too common. And I found that I picked up on that too, like watching the trailer and reading through, is that I thought that was a really neat idea, is because it also adds replayability to the game, mm-hmm. because it's a different game every time you go through it.
And this is not to say that that there shouldn't be more representation in games. I think that is a viable argument. I think that the fact that they did their homework in a way to go out and they interviewed Iraqi civilians who were there, tried to understand what that side is. They could probably use more representation in their publishing and their game design. More people in the room to help them, lead them through what this story is, help them flesh that out just a little bit more. And I understand that's a big argument that they have. And, you also look at the enemies that we are consistently playing against in games. For the past several years since 9/11, really, we're consistently playing against Middle Eastern terrorists, or, if we play a Call of Duty, we're usually playing against Nazis or Russians. So, there's going to be consistently, even a fantasy story, kind of like Call of Duty, where Modern Warfare, where you're playing against, Middle Eastern terrorists or Russians, we are playing in a made up story. But there's always sort of that enemy element. And for a mass majority of an American audience, you're probably going to, as a game designer, say, okay, well, who are the enemies of America? And let's put them in the game, because that's what you're going to be fighting. Because not everybody's going to create a sci-fi Halo.
Yeah, no, very true. Yeah. And I think we talked about that a little bit, and it is, the criticisms of this game, I think, are based in the fact that it is supposed to be representing something in real life. But at the same time, if that is your concern of causing, this anti-Middle Eastern or anti-Muslim sentiment, like, well, there's a lot of other things you're gonna have to look at other than just this game, if that's your real concern. Because that is very widespread throughout Hollywood, movies, TV shows, a lot of other things. So I kind of took issue with that element of the criticism.
Okay, obviously 6 Days in Fallujah, we're going to get more information about this game as it continues to come out. Maybe we'll come back and revisit this on the Scuttlebutt. And I'm interested to see how the controversy sort of continues to develop. And Eric, it's a great point again, just like, continuing to look at what they present from the game and to see what is being written about the game. And as a gamer, you should be educated and make your own decisions about what you want to play, what is entertainment to you, and how you want to be educated about what you're playing. Now, getting to you guys, whenever you're deployed, what were you playing and why were you playing Xbox whenever you're deployed on my tax dollar?
You gotta kill time somewhere, man. Between your 12-hour guard shifts or 16-hour patrols, you got to go back and do something. And actually, on our second tour, Eric and I were roommates, and we spent a lot of time playing Rainbow Six Vegas, right? Vegas
2, yeah.
Nice.
Terrorist Hunt.
terrorist hunt, and we successfully beat every level of terrorist hunt on the hardest level with the most amount of terrorists, and it took us about 8 months to do that.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I mean, a lot of you got to look at that and in a sense that was a fun way to improve our ourselves as soldiers as well. In a way, it was training. Maybe not with the whole hand-eye coordination video game stuff, but that allowed Ryan and I to communicate effectively, work together as a squad, which we would have been doing in on the battlefield, and maneuvering, covering corners, getting to even collapsing corners of a room when you're entering it. It was a tactical shooter. It's not one like Call of Duty where you take 30 hits and then you die. It was you get shot once and you're done, just like real life. Except in real life you don't get a do-over. So that was a way of us to
you're not going back to the checkpoint.
Hone our skills, in a way, and it was fun.
It was fun. And it was, like it took us 8 months because you do get on that hardest level, you get shot once and you're done. And it was like so frustrating. You'd get like, 90% of the way done and you're like, oh God, and you'd be running out of gear and run out of ammo and you still got like 6 guys to kill. But it did help us like really think through things and communicate and talk through things.
What did you guys do when you finally beat it?
We beat each other up a lot.
We did, yeah. One of the games I thought was funny, you might not expect this, we played a ton of Fable. I don't remember if it was Fable 1 or Fable 2, but we played a bunch of games.
That game lets you choose to be the bad guy.
Yeah.
And, what was funny was like there was those little mini games in the game where you could make
coin golf. Yeah.
So we just have to take turns, like just making money. Like it's not your turn, it's your turn to like, bash the swords in a certain order to get as much money as possible. Like I can't do this any longer. So, but it was
so only Xbox at the fob. Like, did you have Nintendo? Did you have Sega?
Well, we had a
PlayStation,
Xbox on the first tour, and then a 360 on the second.
Nice.
And I think Ryan and I actually got into a fist fight over the 203 grenade one time.
We were playing multiplayer on it was one of the Call of Duties, and Eric got very upset because I kept shooting him with the 203 at like blank range, and he'd just die in one hit, and he'd get so upset.
Nice. We're out of time for our bonus episode. I want to thank you both for coming on and chatting about 6 Days in Fallujah, chatting about some games here. I'd love to have you guys both rejoin us to further talk about 6 Days as it continues its development and the more that people write about it and talk about it. But just also come back on and chat about some games sometime. I think it's fun to chat about that or movies. So you're welcome anytime.
Thank you for having me, Sean. I appreciate it.
Of course.
Thanks, Sean.
Ryan, we'll see you soon. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us for another episode of the Scuttlebutt. I want to thank D&D Metal Recycling and Auto Salvage for their generous support and sponsorship of this program. You can find their locations, get quotes, and ask about availability at D&Dautosalvage.com. That's D&Dautosalvage.com. We'll see you next week here on the Scuttlebutt.